What's up, everybody? Welcome back to another Drums and Drams whiskey review. My name is Cameron, and it is freaking hot outside this week. Seems like everywhere across the United States is under some sort of heat advisory. There's tornadoes, there's fires, natural disasters. The world's basically ending, and because of that, particularly because of the extreme heat, the next couple of reviews here on the channel are going to be focused on some lower proof whiskey. You can see some of those bottles here in front of me. And the bottle that I'm going to be focusing on in today's review is this Orphan Barrel Fable and Folly 14-year-old age-stated whiskey. But before we get into that, I wanted to take just a quick second to say, I know it's been a few months since I've put anything out here on the channel. And because of that, as I'm getting back into releasing reviews, the next couple of videos are going to be of a slightly lesser production value, no second camera angle, minimal or zero cuts if I do a good job recording this, just a little bit of background music, and all of that is, in an effort to get content out quickly, to bag a couple of these things, especially these bottles that I'm showing you right now. These are kind of one-off releases, summertime pours that I can talk about very quickly, all the while in the background doing some full reviews and getting that stuff back up and running for all of you. So thank you for your patience. Let's go ahead and get into today's video. As I mentioned, this Orphan Barrel 14-year Fable and Folly. Let's talk about the stats of this particular whiskey. Age statement, obviously 14 years. That's the youngest whiskey in the blend, and there is definitely some older stuff in here, which we're gonna talk about. Proof here, 90. All right, so 90 proof, very standard for Orphan Barrel with what they put out. That's 45% ABV. Now let's talk about the sourcing and blending of this particular whiskey. Many of you know Orphan Barrel from some of their previous releases, the Rhetoric series, which I believe ranges from 20 or 21 years all the way up to 25 years old. Barter House, which is a 20-year whiskey. Forged Oak, which is a 15-year whiskey. All of those that I just named off, the remaining stocks of those whiskeys, Forged Oak, Barter House, and the Rhetorics, all of that remaining inventory has been blended together for this release and then combined with a whiskey from Indiana, which we can imagine is coming to us from MGP, or as it's known nowadays, Ross and Squibb, which is why this has a 14-year age statement on it and not 15 years or higher, which we would imagine from Forged Oak and all of those other whiskeys. That MGP whiskey that's in here presumably is 14 years old. All right. Now, another thing to note about this whiskey is that nowhere on the label does it say straight bourbon whiskey. It wouldn't say Kentucky straight bourbon whiskey because the Indiana stuff is blended in there, but it doesn't say that it's a bourbon. Okay. And because of that, we can imagine that they may have used something else from MGP. We'll talk about what that could be as we do nose, palate, finish, and give this thing a score throughout this review. The only other stuff that I need to cover here is that the SRP is $150. I saw this on the shelf in Michigan 2 weeks ago for $200. That is not where I got this. I wasn't going to pay $200 for it. And secondary value, while there is not a strong secondary market for this right now, when it did release, I saw it up to about $250 before it was more widespread and the distribution was a little bit better. So I'm going to say secondary value between $150 and $250. Okay, so that's all we need to talk about with kind of background information or stats on this. The only other information on the side here, they give some tasting notes. They talk about the blending of Barter House, Forged Oak, various Rhetoric releases. And I think that's pretty much it. All right, so let's go ahead and get into it here. I'm excited to check this thing out. To be honest with you, I've never picked up a Rhetoric release or Barter House, when those things were out on the shelf. I didn't end up purchasing those. I look back on that and I regret that choice every day. For all their imperfections, for their low proof, I really like the aged whiskey that Orphan Barrel has curated and released for all of us. So let's hope that this Fable and Folly is no different. Let's check this out on the nose here. Yeah, first thing, you can just tell this is an aged whiskey. That is evident right away, but otherwise on the nose, I'm getting a couple of different layers. Let's talk about that. Yeah, the kind of top layer on this whiskey is very much orange, citrus-based, spice forward. This is kind of a rye feel on the top of this whiskey. And because of that, you might imagine, and I am imagining, I should say, that the 14-year MGP whiskey blended in here is, at least in part, I mean, it could be, I guess, light whiskey. I guess you never know, but it's feeling like rye whiskey has been blended into this. Yeah, lots of green rye spice, orange citrus, some vanilla right off the top. That's kind of that top layer that I'm getting here. Below that, and what I would consider to kind of be the base of this whiskey, really relates to the Rhetoric releases and Barterhouse, which are the other Orphan Barrel products I've tried that are blended in here. I've never had forged oak, not sure what that tastes like, but you get a lot of this dense, kind of sticky and rich caramel. I know that's a typical bourbon tasting note, but in this case, it really does have that dense, kind of dessert-like feel to it. There's a ton of aged oak, almost like a dusty oak quality. Some leather, as you would imagine, that kind of funky leather quality that you get from an aged bourbon or aged whiskey. And there's actually a little bit of peanut butter in the glass too, which is not something I really remember picking up on previous Orphan Barrel releases. Maybe I wasn't looking for it, but in this case, I do get some peanut butter. Yeah, and again, some vanilla there. It's a really kind of rich vanilla note, something that you expect from a whiskey that spent a lot of time in a barrel. All right, let's check it out on the palate. Cheers. Wow. For a 90 proof whiskey, this is much spicier than you would expect. My baseline 90 proofer is Eagle Rare, particularly like the store picks. I love to drink those. I love to warm my palate up with those. This thing has the spice of like a 100 proof whiskey, which I like. Unfortunately, the mouthfeel is the mouthfeel of a, chill filtered 90 proof or less whiskey. It's really got sort of a thin, crushable mouthfeel here. I guess you don't really expect much more from Orphan Barrel. We kind of know all of their releases are that way, but it's worth calling out here. First sip on the palate for me is just to kind of acclimate to the whiskey, talk about mouthfeel, talk about experience. But now let's do another sip and check out some of the tasting notes here. It's a really soft whiskey in the mouth, and I kind of like that. It is thin, but there's something velvety and soft about it. Now on the palate, you do get a lot of that aged oak quality. It's very, very clear that this is an old whiskey. Aged oak, leather, again, that kind of slightly dusty, funky note there. But I'm actually getting a lot of fruit on the palate, and I wasn't picking that up on the nose. So there is a little bit of a disjunct quality from nose to palate, I would say. I don't always need my whiskeys to be consistent. I think sometimes there's a fun adventure to be had from nose to palate to finish if it does evolve. But in this case, I'm getting almost like a fruit syrup note, like you would get in a fruit cup, that kind of leftover syrup after you eat all of the fruit in the fruit cup. You're getting a little bit of that in here. And that's a note that's familiar to me from some lower proof MGP whiskey. Kind of falls right in line with this, but I don't think that's working very well in the blend with that older Kentucky bourbon. So, from the nosing, there's a lot of great aromas in here, but I don't know that rye whiskey profile, I can't say that I know for sure that it's rye whiskey, but those rye forward notes along with those aged bourbon notes, I don't think they work well together on the nose so much, even though they're all great notes individually by themselves. On the palate here, it still is seeming a little disjunct, and now we've added this kind of random fruity quality. It's a short finish, not a whole lot to be, spoken of here on the finish, except for some lingering spice in the back of the palate. That's kind of a peppery spice, a little bit of that green rye spice that you get from an MGP rye. Let's do one more sip, and then we're gonna wrap this up. Weird that at 90 proof, you get some ethanol on this. You would expect all of that with the age of the whiskey to be totally gone. The older a whiskey is, the more we get away from that white dog, that grain neutral spirit quality, but you get some ethanol here. I like this whiskey because I'm a sucker for old whiskey. It doesn't matter if it doesn't work or the blending is not that great. I just like old whiskey. So I'm gonna try to temper my rating on this now. If I had to give this thing a rating for myself, it's probably like 81, 82 out of 100, like a B minus. But my final rating for this whiskey, based on the fact that it's kind of a weird blend, and the drinking experience is not that great, I'm gonna say this is a 76 out of 100. Give it a solid C. At SRP, I could see wanting to pick one of these up if you are looking for an older whiskey, something that's relatively findable. We don't see a lot of stuff like this that's sitting on the shelves these days, and this is not flying off the shelves at $150. If you go anything above $150, I'm going to say it's a hard pass. Go buy a Calumet 16, which a lot of people are talking about these days. Even though I think that is also sort of an imperfect whiskey, it's going to check a lot more boxes for you, in my opinion, at a higher proof than this Fable and Folly. Who's going to like this whiskey? People like me, fans of old whiskey who aren't going to mind a slightly thinner mouthfeel and a crushable profile. People that like Michter's 10, bourbon and rye, are going to like this. The people who are not going to like this are the people that want a barrel-proof experience, or even just a really intense, full-bodied whiskey. This is not for you, all right? Again, solid C, 76 out of 100. That's going to do it for this Orphan Barrel Fable and Folly review. Thank you for checking it out here on the channel. We've got some more videos to come. The Basil Hayden Subtle Smoke, which is surprising to me, I have to say, and the 10 Cup 10-year bourbon. These things are going to be coming out soon. If you haven't already, please like this video if you enjoyed it, subscribe to the channel, and turn on your notification bell to find out when I'm dropping new content, when I'm going live, which is typically on Thursday nights. And, check out the Patreon if you want to help support the channel. Otherwise, I'm going to get out of here. Thank you so much for tuning in. Cheers, and I will see you next time here on Drums and Drams.